Hey everyone, Rho here. Today we discuss the relationship between Vulkan and Magnus the Red. How, despite their obvious differences, there was a true bond of brothers. General spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from across the Warhammer 40k universe. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, because that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself, without spoilers. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, if you know anything about me by now, you'll know one of my favourite aspects of the lore is the relationships between the Primarchs. For good or bad, these demigod warriors are brothers, and through them we get to see all the sibling dynamics play out. The heartwarming moments, the jealousy, the rivalries, the over-the-top dramatics to the very mundane. The Great Crusade stories allow us to glimpse the Primarchs in their prime, when the Primarchs were true brothers in arms, at least for the most part. And of course the heresy brought us the tragedy, with brother being pitted against brother. The shattering of these fraternal bonds. When it comes to Vulkan in particular, we've been blessed to see him interacting with many of his brothers. Ferrus, Rogel, Horus, Kurz, Corax, and Magnus. Many of these encompassing the full range of the Primarch's journeys, from the early bonds with Ferrus to the later confrontation with Magnus. And it's this relationship that I wanted to focus on today. Visually, you couldn't get two more strikingly opposite Primarchs. Personality-wise, they again are stark contrasts. The arrogant, showcasing Magnus, to the humble, down-to-earth Vulkan. Yet still, that connection of brothers was there. As we saw when these brothers met upon Terra, there was a true sense of regret felt, and the seeds of this were laid far earlier within the heresy, during the events of the novel Deathfire by author Nick Kime. Now, in the aftermath of the events of Istvan, Vulkan was taken prisoner by his brother Conrad, who in his descent to madness tortured his brother mercilessly. Ultimately, we know Vulkan would escape to Macragge, where, long story short, he would suffer a true death. And it's in the novel Deathfire where Vulkan's sons are given permission to leave Macragge with their Primarch's body, their intention to return their slain Primarch home. Now, considering there's the small case of the Ruin Storm still plaguing travel across the galaxy, as you would expect, the travel is fraught with danger. However, it's during this journey we get a surprise appearance from the Crimson King himself, Magnus the Red. As the Salamander vessel is invaded by the minions of the Ruinous Powers, Numion, who is valiantly defending his Primarch's casket, is actually saved by the arrival of Magnus, simply appearing upon the vessel. Now, it is worth mentioning that this takes place after Magnus's defeat to Leman Russ. Not simply because I like to bring it up, which I do, but because Magnus's essence has been shattered into several shards, and those shards are scattered across the galaxy. Now, his power is still immense, freezing time all around Numion as he appears, saving him from the demons assaulting him. However, there's very clearly something not right with this Magnus. His skin is described as cracked, and his leather armour battle-wearied and worn. He also talks more in riddles than the whole Magnus ever did, which is saying something, making the conversation a little hard to follow at times. But there's one key element, one defining clue that gives away the reason of just why Magnus has come. Magnus stood straighter, leaning hard on his staff to do so. Vulkan, his eye narrowed, releasing a spiderweb of wrinkles across his face. You seek to bring him back. Numian lifted his chin. It took a supreme effort of will to raise his hands and take off his helm. He wanted to look the Crimson King in the eye before declaring, "Vulkan lives." A mote of sadness passed over the Primarch's face, darkening it further, but in melancholy, not wrath. Magnus is here because he cares for the fate of his brother. He mourns his loss. Again, this is a Magnus post-burning of Prospero, a Primarch who is being cast out by the Imperium, who is being coveted by Horus and the ruinous powers. Despite not siding with Chaos truly yet, this is a Magnus angry at the Imperium. So him appearing here to the sons of Vulkan, adrift within the madness of the Immaterium, to me really reveals how much Magnus cared for his brother. Again, you couldn't get two more different Primarchs in nature, yet as little as we may have seen of it, there was a clear bond and connection there. It's something I'd love to see, some more interaction between Magnus and Vulkan, particularly during the Great Crusade, showing us why Magnus clearly cared deeply for his brother, why he would go to the effort of appearing to his sons here. Yes, Vulkan was the loving, human one if you will, but that doesn't mean he was universally loved. Far from it, in fact. That title, as we all know, went to Sanguinius. So there must have been a reason the two connected despite their differences. For all the Shard of Magnus may try to disregard it, his mere appearance is really all the proof that's needed. As credit where credit's due, Numian realizes. And as Magnus states his brother is dead, Numian refuses to accept it. My brother is gone. His mind fled and his essence scattered. You ferry a corpse, nothing more. Numian wanted to lash out, to plunge his blade into this mendacious creature, but he knew his life would end the moment he raised a hand in anger. He lives, he said instead. You believe. So must you, or why else intervene? And again later in their conversation, we get this revelation further confirming Magnus's care for his brother. I have watched over you, Numian. To what end? Vulkan is my brother. Is that not reason enough? Now the Shard of Magnus again after this tries to nonchalantly disregard it. But for me, really, the truth is evident here. In any aspect, Magnus clearly mourned the loss of his brother, and in seeing the efforts of his sons, watched over them to ensure they reached their homeworld, helping his brother return home. Ultimately, there's a line from the Horus Heresy novel The Crimson King by author Graham McNeill, which really reveals the truth of Magnus's intentions here. Among other things, said Magnus with a grin, sometimes I would fly the great ocean to gain a better understanding of how the galaxy had moved on without me. Once I even dared Lorgar's Ruinstorm and bore a creaking ship of Vulkan's lost sons through its tempests. So even in Magnus's shattered state, he was absolutely integral in Vulkan being able to be revived. I know I'm a Space Wolf guy, but I have to say I really love pre-Demon Magnus. For all his arrogance and obnoxiousness, there really did beat a caring heart within, one who truly cared for his brothers. People have asked me over the years why I love the lore so much, and it's characters like this. Despite being genetically created generals of war, beings more powerful than we could ever imagine, you can still connect with them. They still experience those very human emotions. We all experience grief and love for our families, and so too do the Primarchs. It's clear there was a fond connection between Vulkan and Magnus. Unfortunately, we could only infer that from Magnus's actions here, as Vulkan obviously was out of the picture to talk. However, later, in their final reunion, and spoiler warning here for the Horus Heresy novel Fury of Magnus by author Graham McNeill, despite the magnitude of the moment, we get the clues of a returned affection from Vulkan. As Magnus is standing before his father upon the Golden Throne, and Vulkan arrives before him, we get the line, "Magnus expected to see hate in his brother's eyes, but he saw only great sadness." And then we get to see Magnus's reaction to seeing his brother alive. In times of old, he might have embraced his brother in a clatter of warplate, made some aloof comment on his dull pragmatism, or counselled him to lift his gaze from the forge fire once in a while. So only a briefest of glimpses, but enough to really tell us there was undoubtedly a fond relationship returned between the two. And again enough to once more heighten the tragedy of another broken relationship between the Primarchs. Vulkan and Magnus is a real interesting relationship to consider. One obsessed with the pursuit of knowledge, one content to simply be, happiest by the light of the forge. In a way, their relationship kind of exhibits how the Primarch project could have been an undoubted success, if only they were all raised on Terra. For if these two complete opposite of Primarchs could forge a bond and connection together, despite being raised on worlds the other side of the galaxy, two undoubted polar opposites in nature, then surely all of them could. So maybe in a way, this unlikely bond of Vulkan and Magnus was an example of the Primarch project in its purest form, the Emperor's real intentions. Even if we take their legions, one again immersed in the world of psychic power, the other humbled and grounded, do these particular differences matter? Is that any reason why the Thousand Sons and Salamanders could get along, whereas the Thousand Sons couldn't with, say, the Space Wolves? Is it due to Vulkan and the Salamander's nature, or is it simply because the experience is behind them? At this point, unfortunately, we don't know, and we most likely never will. The heart of the Emperor's Primarch project was the relationship between the brothers, how their identities and talents overlapped and worked together. When you look at some of the Primarch's rivalries, some are a clash of natures, others are not. Vulkan and Ferrus share a love of craftsmanship, whereas Rogel and Perturabo's similarities cause nothing but rivalry. Jagatai and Magnus got along despite their clear differences, yet Russ and Magnus did not. Would this have changed if they all grew together upon Terra? Or is it simply something instinctual? Would growing alongside a caring brother such as Vulkan have impacted on these ultimate rivalries? As we've already discussed this week, the Emperor called Vulkan's lesson the most important. We'll never know, but it's definitely something to think about. We know the Emperor and Malcador did encourage some rivalry after all. As always everyone, what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. With that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.